Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for an Asia Society Policy Institute event on Japan. I am Wendy Cutler, Senior Vice President of ASPI. Thrilled to have you here along with our panelists who I'll introduce shortly. I'm especially grateful to the Embassy of Japan, and we have a contingent from the embassy led by a good friend, Economic Minister Okazaki-san. So thank you for coming and supporting the event. Before we get into the program, I just wanted to also share with you that one of the reasons we're doing this event is because we have a really special group of Japanese women in town as part of the Asia Society's Emerging Leaders Program for Women in Trade. And with that, this year we have invited 5 Japanese women from the private sector, 2 from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We had a full day today of a lot of discussions on everything from economic security to the WTO to Trump trade policy and tariffs. And tomorrow we'll be continuing our meetings. So if I can just ask, without embarrassing them, if this group of women, if you could just stand up for a minute and we could just turn around and we can meet you and invite you. And there'll be a short reception after this event, so if you just have a few minutes, please try and meet them. They're just an impressive group, and I'm really enjoying getting to know them. Okay, so now with the program itself. Now, with respect to U.S.-Japan relations, we find ourselves at an important moment in this relationship as both countries confront threats to economic security, rapid and unsettling technological change, and turbulent geopolitics across the region and the world. And in the first year of office, the Trump administration has imposed sweeping tariffs and many say has upended the rules-based international trading system. This chaotic and unpredictable approach has left many countries, including Japan, scrambling to meet U.S. demands while preserving the bilateral defense relationship. Now, in many ways, Japan, I think, has fared better than some of our other allies. As far as I know, there have been no tariff threats on Japan in the past few weeks, so that distinguishes Japan. But importantly, even when these trade tensions were increasing over the past year, both countries have continued to work on very important issues, including critical minerals, AI, resilient supply chains, and other issues. And so over the next hour, we're going to explore some of these issues and try and unpack the relationship, try to understand better what has happened over the past year, but even more, what can we expect in the coming year? So let me now welcome our group of experts to discuss these issues. First, and this is in a different order than we're all seated, so excuse me, but William Chu is joining us from the Hudson Institute, where he is a senior fellow and deputy director of the Hudson Institute's Japan chair. And from what I understand, you've been in Japan a lot this past year, so welcome home. Yuka Hayashi, she is vice president of the Asia Group and a member of the firm's Japan practice. Prior coming to the Asia Group, she was a journalist at the Wall Street Journal for many years, and that's where we got to know each other. So welcome, Yuka. Thanks for joining us. And our last minute guest, to not that anyone can replace Emma Chantlet-Avery, but you're a close second, is Mark Mannion, long-term specialist in Asian affairs at the Congressional Research Service, which is the organization that provides information and analysis to Congress. And I guess you're a Japan hand. I just read you have a PhD in Japan economic policy, so we really welcome you as well. So before we start, I'm going to moderate this discussion for a while, and then we'll turn to the audience for questions. So get your questions ready and think about what you might want to ask. So with that, and that was a lot of introductory remarks, let's get to the program. The first question I want to ask each of you is, how would you characterize the U.S.-Japan relationship at this juncture? Yuka, maybe I can start with you.
Sure. I think that the bilateral relations are at a very interesting and potentially very important inflection point.
You sound like a diplomat.
Yeah, I'm working in too many diplomats. Inflection point at this point. On one hand, the U.S.-Japan relations are stronger they have ever been. Both Prime Minister Takaichi and Ishiba used the term golden age of U.S.-Japan relations. The two militaries are working very closely together. Two countries are working together on important strategic issues like supply chain and advanced technology, rare earth. But at the same time, the relationship is going through a very important heightened uncertainty. And many people in Japan are very nervous about President Trump's America First policy, potential changes in the U.S.'s strategic priorities. And people in Japan, both the government officials and the public, are looking at what the Trump administration has done in places like Venezuela and Greenland and see actions that are probably against the international law, which Japan holds very close to heart. Japan looks at the U.S.'s action against Canada or Ukraine and wonder, what is going on. Then, of course, Japan has had to deal with the tariff issue. So there are a lot of issues, but in particular, what is making Japan very nervous is the U.S.'s policy toward China. Is President Trump being too dovish? Is he going to start accommodating the Chinese view of the world? And the president is going to China in April. There are questions about whether he's going to ease export controls. Is he going to maybe ease tariffs? And more importantly, is he going to be making compromise on Taiwan? So you can see that a lot of allies of the U.S. are kind of recalibrating or adjusting their foreign policy. And you can see that in Japan too. Just in the past couple of weeks, Prime Minister Takaichi invited 3 leaders from other countries, South Korea, Italy, and just last weekend, the UK's Prime Minister Starmer. So a lot is going on, but I think things are changing, and we need to watch this very, very closely.
Mm-hmm. So, Will, the same question to you is, you've spent a lot of time in Japan. What are you hearing from the Japanese, and do you agree with Yuka's assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would. I think I think in general, I think the U.S.-Japan relationship is broadly good, but I think there's a lot of questions, right? And a lot of questions that we're going to be dealing with later in 2026 that I think we'll probably cover later in this discussion. But I think broadly, just in terms of looking at why the relationship is, relatively on good ground, is the fact that Japan has been very proactive in its efforts, right? It's been focused on delivering real results, not just empty rhetoric, right? They got the trade deal done. They got the $550 billion MOU done. And I think comparatively, Japan is far ahead of other countries in terms of actually implementing the terms of the trade deal. Certainly, there's been no threat of tariffs by the White House so far. Okay. We'll see. But
don't check your phone during the next hour.
Don't do that. Don't do that. But I think they got the trade deal done. Prime Minister Takaichi has raised the defense spending up to 2%. Everyone's expectation is that she will do so more, especially if she's able to win a clear majority in the election this weekend. And then I think just in terms of, and obviously she also had a very productive and positive visit with Trump and herself back in October 2025. So I think these are all good things that Japan has done, right? And I think Japan has also consciously avoided making sort of these empty gestures that we're increasingly seeing from across the world, right? Whether it's the situation in terms of I think the vote for the 2-state solution back last summer, or for Palestine, or for in terms of acknowledging or celebrating Prime Minister Carney's call for a middle power consortium at Davos, right? These, I think, are fairly empty gestures that I think Japan was wise to avoid. In terms of things that things that could have gone better, certainly I think some people might raise the issue over the Taiwan-China tiff over the Prime Minister Takaichi's words on Taiwan. But to be very honest, I mean the fact that a Taiwan contingency would be a threat to Japan has been acknowledged since 2015. So I don't think Japan really did anything wrong there. Where I really think that Japan could have done better is really addressing its political weakness, right? A series of weak political governments that did not have clear majorities or were not able to push or sort of pass effective legislation. And we'll see how the election this weekend possibly might reshape that. So we'll see.
Mm-hmm. And Mark, over to you. How do you see the relationship? You've been watching it for many, many years. Are we in a good point or a tense point?
Well, I think as Yuka said it there, and as Will sort of hinted at, I mean, there are strengths but also some warning clouds on the horizon. I mean, I think, I heard one observer say recently that operationally, the relationship is really, really strong right now. I mean, just the two countries are cooperating, especially in the security side of the relationship. There's just, the number of exercises, the depth, the way that the alliance managers are pushing this, is sort of continuity with the Biden administration's efforts. So there's a lot of cooperation going on. The leader-to-leader relations seems to be good. I mean, it's new. We'll see what happens if and when Takaichi comes next month, assuming that the election goes in her favor. However, at the policy level, as Yuka made a really good point, that there are just lots of questions, and so many of them center on what the Trump administration's and President Trump's policy towards China is going to be, because that, the whole Japanese grand strategy for the last 10 to 20 years has been oriented around trying to reduce the chances of the emergence of a Chinese hegemony, and one key pillar of that is keeping the U.S. on side. And so if that starts to go awry, then that really upends another pillar of Japanese strategy. The second pillar would be, as Yuka said, sort of tying Japan's economy and fortunes to the liberal international order, and that's already been shaken by the Trump administration in particular now.
So, Will, maybe over to you then. Let's talk a little bit about the trade and investment agreement. Do you think from Japan's point of view, they think they did as well as they could? And it's kind of how I view it. Particularly their tariff rate seems to be in line with the tariffs rates that Korea, the EU, and others got. They got similar exceptions from the Section 232, certain of those tariffs. But they did agree to a huge investment fund of $550 billion. And I think many in the United States are skeptical that this is actually going to materialize. But you were explaining to me before that you've just been in Japan and you've been, meeting with a lot of the key players there, and things seem to be on track. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the trade deal, look, I think Japan did really well. Most importantly, it lowered the reciprocal tariffs down to 15%. It was able to secure the very important sort of Section 232 tariffs on automobiles down to 15%, and also put in essentially some kind of version of a most favored nation sort of status clause for important industries like pharmaceuticals and semiconductors, right? So I think Japan did very well there. I think Japan also kind of understood fairly early on that I think the Trump administration cares a lot about tariffs, but I think even more so than tariffs, they really care about industrial investment and economic security, right? Building out these things, and also technological supremacy or leadership. And I think Japan was able to sort of deduce that these are the things that really matters to the Trump administration, and let us create some kind of framework in which we can work together towards strengthening both of our industries, both of our economic supply chain resiliencies, and also both of our technological development. And so I think the 550 billion fund, I will clarify, it is not an investment fund, it is a loan fund. Everyone keeps calling it an investment fund. That has been poorly marketed. Calling it an investment fund makes it sound like Japan is just giving us the money and then they're never going to see it again. It's a loan fund where they get their money back and then they continue to earn a portion of the profits beyond that. So it's a loan fund or a debt obligation vehicle. And I think it achieves a lot of priorities, shared priorities on key sectors like semiconductors, critical minerals, AI, shipbuilding, so on and so forth. So it addresses both our shared economic priorities, while also, I think, benefiting Japan in terms of like giving them an opportunity to talk directly to the administration, right? This consultation committee that will help advise on potential projects actually gives the Japanese a chance to have direct contact with senior leadership at Commerce and also input into these projects. And there's are also fail-safe measures to ensure that Japan will benefit from these projects. It will not just be some kind of boondoggle. So I think this project has a lot of potential. It's a question of implementing these projects and getting them on the table. My understanding is that they will be doing so very soon, or certainly making the initial announcement very soon. Certainly, I think before the Prime Minister comes, and
You mean
I
of,
think,
of some certain specific investments?
Yeah. I think some of it has already been leaked out in the media, to be very frank. And I think it would be a great idea for Japan to maybe celebrate these projects when the Prime Minister visits in March with a nice ribbon cutting ceremony with the President.
Yuka, you followed U.S.-Japan trade relations for a long time. Does this agreement seem a kind of a surprise to you that this is where we are with Japan? And how would you agree with Will's kind of upbeat assessment of the investment fund?
Well, I agree with Will that Japan did a really good job negotiating this. Japan was very flexible, very focused on getting the tariffs on auto sector off. The auto sector just creates a lot of jobs in Japan, and it's such a critical sector. So Japan pretty quickly agreed on that $550 billion framework.
It wasn't that quick, though. I mean, Akazawa seemed to come here every 2 weeks, meeting with Letnick.
10 times, I understand. But
how many?
10 times.
10
last year.
Okay. A lot of frequent flyer miles.
That's right. But I think Japan's agreement Japan was one of the first ones, right? There's tremendous pressure on officials in the US to come up with some deals that the President Trump can quickly announce. And it's very important for Prime Minister Takaichi to make sure there are deals that the President can announce when she comes here in March. Because that visit comes just before his visit to China, and Japan has to make sure that the president is happy with Japan and also listen to what Japan needs to say about, say, Taiwan. But this deal is huge. $550 billion is a lot of money. It took Japan something like 50 years to accumulate $800 billion in investments. So the hurdle is very high, and I think there's still a lot of concerns among Japanese businesses and also among the Japanese government officials and JBIC on whether there can be deals that are beneficial for them. Companies won't be investing in Japan if they have to give away, some portion of their profits to the U.S. government. I mean, particularly ones that are commercially, strong. They can just do their own deals and get all of the profit. So how they're going to structure the deals is going to be very, very important. There are still so much uncertainty about these deals, but next couple months we will get some first signals of what we might see through this deal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, Wendy, that again, to build on what Yuka was saying, that the size of this investment fund or this loan fund, I'm glad you clarified that, Will, because the Japanese budget last year, I believe, was about $550 billion, before the supplemental. So I'm sorry, $700 billion. So, this is like over 70% of the size of the Japanese.
I read somewhere at 12% of GDP.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's just a huge amount there. And the other thing I would add is that, again, I think, Japan has handled this whole relationship really well over the last year, but this deal gives the Trump administration and President Trump himself an enormous amount of leverage going forward. So if for some reason there's some disagreements, whether it be over trade or investments or North Korea policy, which maybe we'll get to, I don't know, or China policy, there are ways that the Trump administration can really turn this deal around to really turn the screws on Japan and say, hey, you're not living up to your end of the bargain.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I just want to quickly respond to that, though. So the only thing I'll comment is that the Trump administration will probably lack for no shortage of reasons to sort of maybe potentially use tariffs as a threat, right? So it's just one of those things where it exists, and I think this is now a great opportunity to sort of address some of its priorities, so that there are no threats to China, right? The other thing I'll just clarify is that on the funding scheme for the 550 is that yes, it is a huge number. Yes, it is 12% of the Japanese GDP. But at the same time, most of it is actually going to be financed in terms of loan guarantees. And that's going to be in collaboration with Japanese as well as probably American financial firms, right? So I think there is capacity to actually absorb all of that. It is not going to be literally $550 billion in terms of grants moving from Japan to the United States. I think that's one of the big challenges that we've been facing in terms of trying to talk about this MOU, this loan fund, because everyone assumes that it's just going to be money moving from Japan to the U.S., whereas there's actually a lot of other mechanisms that they're going to rely on to actually address it and fund it. And so the impact on, say, Japanese finances or the currency is actually not going to be all that significant, certainly according to JBIC and the Ministry of Finance.
Mm-hmm. So, and just one more question on this, because you did mention Korea, and with Korea right now, this fund's a lot more domestically controversial, and it took a while for Korea to even agree to this fund, and when they did, they seemed to almost get better terms than Japan, not only in terms of the overall value of the investment fund, but the fact that Korea could stage the fund over 10 years at $20 billion per year. Any insights into why this part of the deal, and particularly coupled with higher tariffs, was not more, why wasn't there more opposition to this deal in Japan? Anyone want to?
I think this scheme is so complex. I read about it like so many times and still don't quite understand how it works. So it's very difficult for the public to understand what it is. And I've also noticed that there wasn't a whole lot of media coverage of that in Japan, and I am not quite sure why. Maybe the Japanese government didn't want the media to write about it too much, or the media thought that it was too complex and dry. But Japan is looking at what has happened to Korea, and they're facing the threat of a 25% tariff. So if the Japanese deal doesn't go well, there's a possibility that Japan could also face the same kind of threat. So when that happens, I think people in Japan are going to start paying attention.
Mark?
Yeah, I think, Wendy, and you would know this probably even better than I would, but the United States is very popular in both countries, Japan and South Korea, but the scope for criticism of the United States, I think, is much broader and deeper in South Korea than it is in Japan. And there are more political incentives to criticize government policy towards the United States in South Korea than in Japan in general. And there's a long history, as you well know, of in South Korea, really just broad public opposition to trade concessions to the United States. I think you
Yeah,
have,
kind
you
of
have,
been
you
there,
have a
done
few
that.
battle
Yeah.
scars to show for that.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
whereas, I mean, of course there's resistance in Japan, but it tends to be done more at the bureaucracy rather than at the public level. So it's not as politically, vibrant in that way.
I mean, I think in Japan's case, I think it sort of took a look at the current situation, certainly in terms of the administration's priorities, and it acknowledged these realities, right? I mean, you mentioned earlier about how Minister Akazawa came here 10 times and to sort of try to negotiate things, and certainly I think early attempts to sort of focus on economic security and cooperation didn't quite work, and they sort of recalibrated towards the Assistance Investment Fund. I think one of the challenges has been the fact that the Japanese media has not really covered it, and I think that is partly because it is kind of a dry topic, but also partly because I think the Japanese media just wasn't that interested in it when it's actually quite important, right? But I would say in terms of the difference between South Korea and also Japan in terms of this fund is that I think South Korea, obviously is an important trade partner for the United States, but I think their efforts and their investments in the United States are actually very concentrated in specific areas, right? Whereas I think Japan has been invested in the United States for over 50 years now, right? It is impossible to actually live an American life without encountering sort of the products of Japanese investment in the United States, right? There's a reason why it's been 50 years and over $890 billion. And so Japan was very well positioned to actually cover the full spectrum of all the industrial policy initiatives that the administration wants to implement. And so things like AI data centers, things like shipbuilding, things like critical minerals, right? These are all areas where Japanese companies are actually world leaders in sort of contributing to these sort of solutions. And so I think Japan was able to sort of take on this larger role because it frankly has more capacity to do so and has a lot of experience in doing so.
And I would just add to that, I think the fact that they were able to get a 15% tariff on autos, which was in line with the EU, which had already been announced, was a big get for them. And I think also, the fact that they didn't have to move on rice or beef was also big, because agriculture always is kind of the elephant in the room in any trade negotiation with Japan. Maybe let's turn briefly to the election this Sunday. I understand that's very unusual in Japan to have an election during the winter. But the recent polling does suggest that this may lead to a Takaichi victory and a victory for the LDP. And we'll have to see when the ballots come in. Was this I think a lot of people were surprised that after 3 months in office that she decided to call a snap election, and some people thought she was, this was risky. But assuming she does win, what does this mean for Japan, but also what does it mean for our bilateral relationship? And any comments you have on the chemistry between Donald Trump and Takaichi-san, because it seemed to me to be pretty warm. I'm not sure if our president now is practicing his drums, but I would if I were him. Who wants to take that one? Mark, why don't you start?
Yeah, I mean, it was a risky throw for her to do this so soon. And there are lots of reasons we could go into them why she might have chosen to do them. But assuming that she wins and is able to increase the coalition's majority, it strengthens her hand, I think, with the United States. I mean, President Trump has shown that he likes a winner, and certainly he's more likely to respect that. I think also, this is going to bring things around to China a bit. I think it also would increase her hand with China. Because,
how so?
Well, if you look at, the last time Japan China relations were really bad, it was in the aftermath of Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's, in 2012, 2013, he came back into office, he visited Yasukuni Shrine, and that led to China to really put a deep freeze on the relationship, and they had an all-out campaign to isolate Japan globally, and it failed spectacularly for many reasons, but one of them, I think, was that the Chinese were unable to sort of make any inroads domestically inside Japan because Abe had such a firm grip on power. He also was extremely active diplomatically. I think he visited something like, it was a crazy number of countries in those first couple of years. And so the Chinese saw that, they were just not making any headway there. And so they backed down, and 2 years later, Abe and Xi Jinping met in Beijing, I believe it was, and the relationship actually went through about 10, 12 years where it was at least stabilized and if not warm. And I suspect, there is a similar dynamic that might be at play here. If the Chinese see that Takaichi's position was only strengthened in part as a result of their reaction, that is more likely to make them back down. The key wild card, again, to come back to this, is what the U.S. policy towards China is.
I think, look, if she were to win this weekend, I think that would really give her a lot of, I agree a lot with what Mark said, right? I think it would give her a real boost. I think she's come into office with a very clear vision in terms of her policy agenda, right? Her focus is on economic security and seeing this interlinkage between economic growth, economic security, and also addressing common Japanese everyday concerns over affordability, right? A concern that they have over there, issues that we have are also very concerned with over here. And I think her ambitious policy program is to address these issues, to create a virtuous cycle of Japanese investment in technology and innovation to bolster both its technological leadership and to build greater resilience against economic coercion, while also setting Japan at least on a more viable path towards long-term economic growth. So I think, if she is able to do so, it will give her a strong hand in able to implement these policies. From a U.S.-Japan perspective, right, like Mark said, right, Donald Trump likes a winner, and I think, frankly, I think President Trump is he's definitely a results-based kind of guy, right? He likes seeing results, and having a strong leader with a strong, parliamentary majority allows Prime Minister Takaichi to implement the promises that she's going to make, and ahead of these things like increased defense spending and so on and so forth. And I also agree with Mark in terms of how it would strengthen her position against China, because I think part of the reason why she's actually able to make this snap election call is because of the China's attempt to sort of weaken her over this Taiwan issue, and it actually backfired on them and actually made her even more popular from a voter standpoint. And so I think that's why she's called for this snap election. So I think certainly I think China, in their case, they respect strength. They only respect strength, and I think having a strong leader in Tokyo allows for the Japan-China relationship to get to a point where maybe it can sort of de-escalate from where it is now.
I agree with pretty much everything Mark and Will have said, but I based on polls, Prime Minister Takaichi is likely to win big, giving the LDP a majority in Parliament. And what that means is she can really consolidate her power and pursue her policy. And I think she has been a little bit surprising to many observers. I think a lot of people in Japan had an image that she's kind of a conservative ideologue type of person, but she came in and really surprised people with very practical choices. When she announced the cabinet, we were surprised to see that Akazawa-san, who was very much Ishiba-san's aide, was stayed in the trade minister position because he was the one who was leading the negotiations with the U.S. And
which is very practical and wise on her part, right?
Yes. And Koizumi-san was appointed defense minister, even though he was her biggest rival, and he's done really well in that position. So I think all of those choices made people in Japan think that, oh, this is a very practical leader, but also somebody with very strong message and with a vision for the country, particularly in areas like economic security. So in terms of U.S.-Japan relations, as Will was saying that her victory is going to only improve her relationship with President Trump because, yeah, he likes winners.
It will, if she does win and win big, of course, it will take away an excuse for her if she did need to resist U.S. pressure, right? Sometimes, the weaker your government is, the weaker your standing is, the more of an excuse she can have. Say, well, I would love to do that, Mr. President, but I've got this parliament here and I don't have a majority, so she will have to deliver. She won't have that excuse if she does win big and she does get hit with pressure from the U.S., for example, for more greater contributions in the host nation support negotiations on the alliance that are likely to come up over the next year.
Okay. So the last question for me, and then we'll turn to the audience, is 2026, and I think, Mark, you gave me a good opening for that. There are important security negotiations that need to take place this coming year. I appreciate it. So that's one potential flashpoint in the relationship. I mean, does anyone want to talk more about that? And in addition, are there other flashpoints in the relationship? I think, Yuka, when you opened, when you kind of went around the world, you mentioned a few. But what could go wrong? And I hate to, go wrong, but also what could go right? I think we talked about what could go right, particularly if she comes out of this election in a stronger position. But what should we be watching for?
Okay, I'll go first.
Okay. Thank you.
I think there are two flashpoints that I can think of. One is the kind of trouble with the investment fund and the U.S. reintroducing the tariff threat against Japan. That would be really bad for Takaichi-san's popularity, but also very bad for Japan's economy. Another flashpoint is maybe excessive pressure on Japan from the U.S. on defense spending. The Washington just released the National Defense Strategy. There's a line in there that the standard spending for allies is now 5% of GDP. That is
and she's at 3.5%, or that's her goal?
She's just accelerating, reaching 2%.
But the goal is higher, right?
You would assume that, but I don't think she mentioned any specific number. 3%, 3.5% is a high number for Japan. So like 5% is a crazy number, I think, particularly given Japan's fiscal condition. So excessive pressure there could really shake the bilateral relations and could put pressure on Prime Minister Takaichi.
Will, do you agree?
So I would say it's not flashpoints or problems. I think I would say things that our friends at the embassy will have to spend a lot of time addressing. But I think just in terms of like potential things that need to be addressed this year, right? That I think we will be spending a lot of time on. On the security side, I think I agree with Yuka, right? Certainly there's the issue about host nation support and also defense spending. The defense spending, which currently at 2%, it's likely to go more, but we have not actually gotten a definitive number. But there is a question of like, well, how do you increase defense spending without either raising taxes, selling more bonds, or cutting social services? Right?
Invest more in the United States.
There's also benefits there, but I mean, that is a real challenge, right? And how do you square that circle? On the economic side, I think, as Yuka said, right, in terms of the follow-through of the 550 billion fund, right, I think they're still working out the details. These are likely to continue to be worked out even as they approach the Prime Minister's visit. And just the implementation of these projects, I think, will be challenging, and they will also not just be an economic project, but they are also political projects, right? And that makes them much more charged. Related to that is also, I think, volatility in terms of divergence on economic security. I think the Trump administration has targeted sort of strategic stability with China in the short term on economic security, but I think long term you look at their actions and it's actually been very China skeptical. So I think there are two different timelines that the Trump administration is operating on. However, for Japan, which Mark was talking about earlier, right, it has been trying to avoid this Chinese security as well as economic hegemony. Japan is, both timelines. Japan is very skeptical about what China is trying to do on economic security, and so trying to address these divergences in terms of the U.S. outlook and the Japanese outlook, I think will also be a key issue to address. And then finally, just if Prime Minister Takaichi is going to spend more, what does that do to financial markets and sort of the instability that we've been seeing the past few weeks in terms of bonds and also currency fluctuations? So I think these will be concerns.
Yeah, I could see at least three things. I mean, we've already talked about the burden sharing or host nation support.
And again, those
Yeah.
negotiations need to take place during 2026, but this
Correct.
could go to the beginning of 2027.
Right. As far as I understand, the agreement expires at the end of the coming fiscal year for Japan. So in other
Japan's
words, at the
fiscal
end
year.
of March 2027.
Yeah.
Right. So they need to happen soon. And I suspect that the Japanese government strategy is going to be to try and keep this below the level of the president, because during President Trump's first term, he famously in Korea, demanded a five-fold increase in what South Korea was paying. So they're going to want to keep it below the presidential level. So I would expect that Will and I were just saying that don't identify a number is what their strategy is going to be, particularly for this upcoming summit there. Secondly, China. We've already talked about U.S.-China policy, and if there is some sort of a quote-unquote G2 arrangement that's worked out, that's going to create lots of difficulties for Japan and possibly create tensions between the U.S. and Japan. And then the other thing I'd throw out there is North Korea. And there it could go in two different directions. One, if there's some sort of crisis, like a military crisis, that could create difficulties. But maybe even more importantly, or more, the thing that could create even more difficulty is if President Trump does have some sort of breakthrough with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. And we saw this during the first administration, when President Trump was about to go meet with Kim Jong-un, Prime Minister Abe flew to Washington to try and persuade him not to, or at least to try and tamp down what President Trump was going to do, and that basically had little to no effect. So that could create lots of tensions and consternation in Tokyo if there is some sort of rapprochement between the U.S. and North Korea again, without any significant reduction in the threat that North Korea poses to Japan.
Good. A lot to watch for. Let's hope many of these flashpoints don't come to fruition. Okay, audience, do you guys need a mic from here? Okay. It's kind of hard to see from here. Raise your hand, and we'll take a few at a time. Who would like to ask a question? Oh. Someone in the back. If you can identify yourself before you ask a question, and just one question.
My name is Takahiro. I'm a visiting fellow Japan chair at Hudson Institute from Sophia University. My question is about the regional security policy, which is relating to the economic interest of the country. So it seems like the U.S. discussed about more self-dependence of national security in South Korea. How could Japan maintain and enhance security alliance system with the United States? Should we continue a more deep discussion at executive level, or should we have more department level communication with the United States and Japan? Thank you.
Other questions?
Hi, my name is Nathan. You touched on this a little bit, but my question is regarding the Japanese response or frustration towards the lack of a strong U.S. response towards China in the current crisis over Taiwan comments. Is the perception in Japan that, hey, the U.S. being more lukewarm, this is just temporary, they're not trying to rock the boat with the current U.S.-China deal, or are there fears that this is a more enduring sign of a big shift in U.S. softening its support for Japan? Thank you.
One more, if there's one more question.
And somewhat follow on with the economic and defense cooperation between U.S. and Japan. What you see as the outlook for potentials to leverage Japan's defense industrial base, which it's actually more robust than the U.S. one right now, especially in terms of the Navy right now. Where do you see that going? As in, could the U.S., given all this talk about really improving the shipbuilding capacity, adding additional naval support in Asia Pacific and other regions, is there much potential for leveraging the installed base in Japan, whether shipyards and others? And of course, this would also extend to Korea, which at this point it's probably the only U.S. ally in the Indo-Pacific that could even rival China in terms of shipbuilding capacity. So any outlook on that front?
Okay, so great. We have 3 questions, one on the economic security agenda, one on the Japan-China relationship and the U.S. response to that, and one on the outlook for Japanese industrial capacity and their industrial base. Who would like to take any one of them, or all 3 of them, or?
I can start babbling.
Thank you, Mark. Okay.
I'll start babbling and give you guys time to think of more coherent answers. First of all, I have to say, the lights are so bright here
I know,
that
we
it's
can't
like,
see.
almost like we're online. Like
Yeah.
this would be just this voices coming at us here. So I apologize if we're squinting a little bit. I guess maybe I'll take the first question and a little bit of the second one. So as I understand, part of the gist of the question was just looking at like Trump administration's push or encouragement of South Korea to adopt a more autonomous self-defense and basically do more on their own. Of course, Japan has been pushing this way for over a decade now, and with U.S. encouragement. So I think the U.S. would definitely encourage that. I think one of the difficulties, though, of the questions that we've been talking about over the overall U.S. direction going forward is, will Japan do, quote unquote, too much or more than is really ideal in terms of an alliance sharing system? So, for example, there are lots of questions about the joint fighter jet program, development program that Japan has with the UK and Italy. Like, is that really the most efficient use of these very scarce resources that are going to become even more scarce because of these investment deals, because of other things going on, raising defense spending anyway? But from a purely self-defense point of view, it makes perfect sense for Japan to hedge its bets by not just relying on the U.S. And Japan was doing this even before all these questions that started to be raised about U.S. reliability from the Trump administration. So are we going to get because of the Japanese reaction to the Trump administration's policy, quite rational reaction, are we going to get a suboptimal situation in terms of alliance cooperation there?
Okay. Will, Yuka?
Yeah, then I'll go then. So I would like to ask the first and third question about increased burden sharing. So there's a question about defense spending, but also I've been very impressed by how much Japan has been doing outside of the simple defense spending numbers. Japan, Prime Minister Takaichi recently said that they're going to set up a new intelligence agency within the Prime Minister's office. Japan also started a security clearance system. All of these things are going to make it very easy for the U.S. defense sector to cooperate with Japan.
These are things we've been asking them to do, right?
Yeah, start doing a lot of things. So, we shouldn't just be looking at the defense spending number, but look at all of those things that Japan is doing. Also, Japan is easing the restrictions on exports of military equipment. So a lot of things are going on. I've been very surprised to see all of that. Then on shipbuilding, my understanding is that Japan's shipbuilding industry is not really interested in coming to the US. I think that Japan is going to leave that role to South Korea, which already has started a huge, what was it, submarine joint venture in Philadelphia. I think what Japan is interested in is rebuilding its own domestic shipbuilding industry and maybe start helping the US by repairing naval vessels that come to Japan. So I don't think that we can expect Japanese shipbuilders to start setting up operations in the US.
Yeah, I mean, I think what Japan has been doing, so many things that we haven't covered even today, is that I think what they're really trying to do is do more lateral partnerships with the United States, right? Especially in the area of security, whether it's economic security, right, with the cabinet, the National Security Secretariat creating a new economic security sort of think tank. They're going to revise the economic security promotion law, which is going to have many new sort of initiatives that address, say, inbound investment, right? And these are all areas where we have parallels with the United States, and that they are very clearly demonstrating that they are trying to create new horizontal bonds at the sub-leader level to create cooperative opportunities. On regional sort of security, I think that's an area where I think oftentimes, like, yes, 5% is a huge number, right? But if you think about the NATO 5% number, right, 3.5% is on military goods, but 1.5% is on infrastructure. And Japan already spends a ton of infrastructure, right? I mean, so much of the money that goes from Tokyo into the various prefectures around the country is about building out infrastructure and maintaining local infrastructure. And certainly these are infrastructure that would be necessary in case of a crisis. And certainly I do think there is scope to maybe assign maybe some of these projects as part of Japan's defense spending. And I think that's an interesting area to maybe sort of explore down the line. But I think primarily in terms of U.S.-Japan cooperation on security, is a lot of it is going to be through the things that we talked earlier about maintenance and repair of naval ships, but also joint production and just finding new ways of producing more, right? I think what we've seen in terms of the wars in Gaza, in Ukraine, is that we just need more stuff. The future war it may not be fast, it may be very long, and we are going to need capacity to produce all these products. Certainly, I think the U.S. defense industrial base has challenges. Japan's defense industrial base has many successes, including the sale of Mogami class frigates to Australia. I think there are opportunities for greater cooperation. I think the U.S. government actually has been approaching to Japanese private sector, Japanese government, to encourage them to expand their cooperation, be it in Japan or especially in the United States. But I think that raises a whole slew of questions that will have to be addressed in C-suites. But I think there is a lot of potentialities there. It's just about working out the details in a way that ensures that both sides are comfortable.
Okay. Well, with that, we're going to need to draw this panel to a close. And I agree with Mark, who just said there's so many things we weren't able to discuss. But we're going to have a reception afterwards, so everyone feel free to continue discussing these topics. And please, if you have time, to introduce yourselves to our visiting delegation from Tokyo. And with that, please give me a hand in thanking Mark, Will, and Yuka for a great time. Thanks, guys. Thanks so much.
What we are doing right now here.